Not only is it important to keep the stream itself healthy, but the headwaters. The headwaters, that is where the creek comes from. Now, we gotta be real careful walking around here. We got more of that skunk, and it loves it over here. It sure loves it. We're gonna stay on the deer trails so that we don't kill it. It's just as important to protect the headwaters. Now, here what we got going on is a set of fens. It's basically just super saturated soil with intermittent streams and pools throughout it, and lots of skunk cabbage. And one of the main mechanisms of these headwaters, hey little chickadee, it's not so much the streams. Are you listening to me? You listen to my lecture? Hey, let me know if you get bored, okay? Let me know if it drags on too long. It already is, I'm sure. Okay, yep, that's for sure. Well, these soils are saturated with water. We have a profusion of it, and this we call generally the hyporheic process. So hyporheic refers to water that flows under the ground, out of our perception. And these fens are pretty much an entire hyporheic wonderland. We're in a universe of waterways, tiny, porous, sometimes microscopic waterways are flowing underneath our feet. And now, if you know anything, oh shit. Now think of your water filters. Think of like a Brita or something. How does it get that done? How does it get all the pollutants out of your water? Well, it's an extremely fine grain of substrate or whatever that they put inside the filter. Very, very porous on a microscopic level. It's the same thing at work here. You can imagine everything that your Brita filter can filter out of the water, out of the tap water. Well, imagine a Brita filter that's, hundreds of acres in area and unknowably deep. Imagine that. What do you think that does for us? Well, it cleans our water before it even enters the stream. If we can continue to maintain the processes down the entire stream that are keeping the water clean, well, all this work done up here in the headwaters is not for naught. But we have to protect the whole thing, if we want to be able to use mills down on the mill tables of the creek where it starts to descend rapidly enough that it can power our mechanical machines, our mechanical machines. The water that you're dealing with is already quite clean, and any pollutants that you add to it will not be compounding on top of a underlying issue. So how do we protect headwaters? Well, we got to make sure that we keep everything that could pollute them as far away from them as possible. This is one of those cases where you cannot conserve. Along the waterway, conservation is fine. We need stuff. The critters need stuff. The plants need stuff. So along the waterway, we can make all that happen. But here, there's not much for us. It's an incredible expense to drain this and to develop it subsequently because it will continue to fill in with water due to the geography. And in addition, we'd be missing out on a vital function. All of our water being clean by the time it gets to us already. The idea is that this needs to be preserved. This is an example of preservation. This needs to remain untouched. As I will discuss at the mouth of the creek, wetlands are some of our most vital ecosystems. Most organisms that are not 100% conservative to a specific ecosystem need wetlands for something, whether it's one of their prey even, or some other kind of some other animal or species with which they have a symbiosis, be it mutual or parasitic. Those are all necessary symbioses. And whether it's the species itself in question or one of those species with which it interacts in an ecological way, it is most likely dependent at some point on wetlands. So think about that. It's the fish that we eat, all right? It's the insects that feed the animals that we eat. This is the nutrients for our crops, for the nutrients that are in the irrigated water that feeds our crops, that feed us. And so much more. Really, I can't even say it all off the cuff. I probably will just post a little list of things that it does that'll be spraying down at the bottom of the screen right now. And it looks like we're just about at the fen. Been going through all this woody stuff. This is all very young growth. Now, the problem here is that this is not accommodating our wetland plants anymore. No, this is accommodating a variety of invasive native trees. We've mostly got birches down here. And all of this stuff is quite young. In these wide open areas, wind throw is likely to throw down a lot of our more mature trees when they grow. But we have this immensity of young saplings, and that they are benefiting along with all this reed canary grass and other invasive grasses. You got Echinocloa and just stuff. This bad stuff. It's stealing all those nutrients that we could be using. You see, native species only survive and thrive due to an exchange of nutrients. Everything is kind of balanced out. You know, one species will produce through some process or another a nutrient that another species needs, and only take as much as it needs. On the other hand, when you get a situation where plants become invasive, they take everything out of the soil and leave nothing behind, to the point that they will even suffocate themselves out and leave behind a barren environment, because these did not evolve to respond to any of the outputs of the species around them, because they didn't evolve with the species around them. Even sometimes native species can do this, because when certain natural disturbance regimes are upset, those species no longer have the control mechanisms in place that kept their population at a stable density. Now they're allowed to thrive so much that it's like fucking Ebola, and it will destroy they will destroy themselves by their own overpopulation. What does that sound like? Why does that sound so familiar? Why is that so relatable? Huh. Weird. This looks kind of promising. Yeah, Ma, I'll be back in an hour. That was bullshit. Because here I am. Oh, Jesus. There we go. Ha! We've broken through. Yes, we have. Alrighty. Now really watch our steps. Now we're really watching our steps. Oh, beautiful. Oh my God. Oh yes. Oh wow. I'm in love with the wetlands. You can feel the power of all the life here. There's so much life here. Most of our migratory birds across the continent utilize wetlands for their extreme abundance of food. A native wetland will have great diversity, great biodiversity. And there will be a great many species of birds that, you know, some of them control certain pests for us. Some of them are carrying certain seeds from one place to another for us. Some of them are more important to us because they help indicate the health of the environments that we and themselves depend upon. There are also an abundance of amphibians. They love our wetlands, of course, you know, the amphibians. We got a lot of nice shrubs and stuff. This guy. The amphibians are important to us, again, for the pest control aspect, but also even more so than practically any bird species. Those amphibians can indicate to us when something's wrong with an environment. So in order to know if the water is good for us, we look at the frogs, and they will tell us long before perhaps we would ever notice that the water is not healthy, because they are extremely sensitive to chemical, thermal changes in their environments, and they're also very sensitive to alterations in gene flow. So that helps tell us when we're fucking up. And of course, we have a lot of Phragmites in here. That's a Eurasian breed. It's incredibly aggressive, but it hasn't quite taken over yet. Mostly because there's plenty of other invasive grasses that already have. But part of the mechanism of a wetland is still served even when it's filled with invasives, which means that even when it's a low-quality wetland like this, it's still very much worth protecting. And there, wetlands go through dry and wetter periods. As it gets wetter, or as it gets drier, I should say, there will be a greater release of carbon and other nutrients that were locked within the sediment. And when it gets wetter, there will be a greater retention of all that stuff. So you have a balance, and basically kind of acts as the like a lock in a canal, letting out controlled amounts of water so that ships can pass through properly. Well, these wetlands are letting out controlled amounts of pollutants and toxins so that the environment can process them correctly. When you have healthy wetlands, they do that all by themselves. We don't really have to interfere much except in making sure those wetlands stay healthy. Why does this play into E.B. Clark and his industrial ambitions? Well, so down on the mill tables, again, that's the part of the creek where the water flow is fast enough to power a mill. They could have engaged in their industries without, such a drastic impact on the surrounding environment, and knew, of course they didn't know at the time, they didn't understand how this stuff worked, but if they had known, they could have come up here, be locked down this wetland and prevent all forms of interference with nutrient cycling, with the water flow. That would have made their job a lot easier down on the mill and ensured a much longer period of productivity for it, because the water that's coming down to them is coming from a healthy flow. The interference is greatly minimized because they're not letting the source of all that water degrade. And in addition, they could have tried to preserve some of the floodplain or wetland complexes along the length of the creek, punctuating it with preserved pieces that are intermittent with conserved pieces of land. Conserved pieces of land could be used by people under a certain regulation of output, of the waste of anything really. Any alteration they could make could be mitigated or controlled, or at least observed, so that they know that they're not overwhelming those punctual preserved areas. That's essentially how you can apply that very basic principle to practically anywhere in the world, really, to maximize our coexistence, but also our quality of life, not just for humans, but everything else. That way, when all that water falls, if this land is properly preserved and or conserved, when that storm comes down, no one's got to worry about flooding nearly as much, and mills, if they still existed, wouldn't have to prepare for overflow or anything like that, because they would have healthy enough wetlands to process that water and let it out, again, in controlled bursts. And that's another great thing about wetlands, is they can retain so much water within that super porous soil, that it comes out in controlled bursts afterwards. It slowly percolates, I should say, its way through the wetland and out into our waterways. Instead of just rushing down the stream through all our pavement and our development, which has no water retention at all. You see what I mean? You see where I'm going with this?